interesting. I do have some visual aids that we'll get through. Us versus Them, this is actually the flyer that was created for it. It's also, the artwork is the same as the side panel artwork. And an interesting thing to note is that the person, the face that is featured down there is actually a self-portrait by Jeff Lee, the artist who created Qbert, who he also did the graphics for this game, and that is him on the poster. But the story about Us versus Them is basically Laserdisc technology was a new technology that came out in, I'd say, 1983. Gottlieb started working on Laserdisc hardware. There was a hardware guy named Dave Pfeiffer, an engineer who created a system. Basically, he modified our regular arcade system, which had two planes. It had a foreground plane and a background plane. And he just modified it to replace the background plane with live video that was coming off of a Laserdisc. Laserdisc technology, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, were large discs, looked like, old 78 RPM records, but they were silver, they were laser, and they held video. I think they didn't hold that much video. This game held about 30 minutes of video on it, on the disc. And so we were looking to exploit that, and the thing they came up with was a game called Mach 3. And Mach 3 was a flying game where there was just filmed footage from the air that was shown as, that was what was on the Laserdisc, and then on top of that was overlaid computer-generated graphics of a plane, and there were two modes you played it in. One was like a bombing run, so it was very simple. The screen was sort of, the ground that you were looking at was scrolling, and you were flying this plane, you'd go back and forth and maybe bank and drop bombs. And you'd see a target, and so you had a time when you dropped your bomb. And then there was another flying mode where you were flying, you were looking behind the plane. It was like a first-person mode. It was a very popular game. Now, there weren't that many Laserdisc games. You might have heard of Dragon's Lair. Dragon's Lair, the interesting thing about Dragon's Lair, it was a completely animated game. So they created basically a cartoon, and at certain parts of that cartoon, there was a branch where you had to push the joystick in a certain direction, and or push the button. And if you did it at the right time, the video would continue on. If you didn't do it, you would jump to a death animation, and then you had to go back and start again. So that was Dragon's Lair. But again, a completely animated system. There was also a movie, a Clint Eastwood movie called Firefox, and they turned that into a Laserdisc game with animation. Ooh, too hot?
Yeah, slowly.
Animation. Sorry, not animation. With live action and a computer-generated plane, much like Mach 3. I remember playing that game and I liked it. I have no idea what they did technology-wise, but it seemed like it was a good effect. Anyway, there weren't that many of these Laserdisc games. Well, Mach 3 was a big success, and Gottlieb, this was not an uncommon thing, but Gottlieb was looking for a way to capitalize on that success by putting another game into the same cabinet. So they would call that a kit, or a conversion kit. So basically, operators, the people who bought our games, we were a manufacturer, we built the games, we sold them. Those people who bought them, the game had a lifetime. It would collect quarters for a time, and then people would kind of get bored with the game. Well, to extend the life of that game, you pop in another program, you pop in some new artwork, you pop in this case, another Laserdisc, and some side art, and poof, you have a new game with the same cabinet. The cabinet was a very large portion of the cost of a video game, arcade game. So they liked this idea of conversion kits, and Gottlieb came to us, basically the entire department, does anybody have an idea for a conversion that we can put into a Mach 3 cabinet? The guys who said yes were a guy named Dennis Nordman and a guy named Rich Tracy. Rich Tracy was the art director for Gottlieb, and Dennis Nordman was hired as a designer. He actually became a pinball designer later. He worked for Williams, I believe, as a pinball designer. And something I mentioned in my earlier talk is that in Gottlieb, the programmers were generally the designers. We didn't actually have just designers, people who just basically wrote up game designs and then the programmers just implemented them. That wasn't the way we worked. but they have this idea to do a science fiction, like a 50s science fiction invasion movie. And I was interested. That certainly was up my alley and something I enjoyed and appreciated. So I thought, okay, let me jump on board. And we decided, you know, we were in the brainstorming phase. We were like, well, what can we do? And one of the things we decided was to have different angles, like you would see in a movie, or you know, angles. Movies cut to different angles. So we'd have different angles of gameplay. And I'll show you, I actually have a lot of video that I brought, so I'll show you samples of the game. But, and then we also, one thing I was interested in, I was sort of a fledgling actor at the time, and I thought, well, you know, a movie, you need characters, you need live action. And that wasn't really done very often. And here you have Laserdisc, you have actual movie footage you can put in there. Let's put in live action. So we had like 10 to 15 second clips of a scene, very short. And then you'd go into a minute of gameplay, of flying gameplay. So we brainstormed this, Dennis and Rich wrote it, and then it was a matter of we got to shoot some of this footage. One thing I will say before I move on, I'm going to say two things before I move on. One, I've never really talked about this game at length, so this is a little new to me. I've made some notes, and I'm going to refer to them, so I apologize in advance if I'm referring to my notes a lot. Secondly, there is a working us versus them at an arcade in New Hampshire called the Fun Spot. I don't know if you guys are fans of video games, but somebody told me about this, like one of the biggest video arcades in the world. It's still in operation. I was there a couple of years ago and I actually got to play us versus them. That was a real treat for me. So, the team for this game was myself as the programmer, Dennis Nordman and Rich Tracy, as I had mentioned, were designers. A guy named Craig Bierwaltz was the sound designer. I had worked previously with Jeff Lee, with Dave Thiel on Qbert. He did the sounds for Qbert. Craig was normally a guy who did sounds for pinball machines, but Dave was otherwise occupied on some other game, and so we brought in Craig for sound. And Dave Zabriskie was a guy who did the score. So I'll talk more about that in a minute, but let me show you here. So here's the back of the flyer, which shows a lot of scenes from the movie. And we'll see some of the actual video here, but there's so much to talk about. All right, this is what the cabinet looked like. Basically a Mach 3. Okay, so we had to film all this flying footage, and we didn't know the first thing about filming anything. So Dennis Nordman and myself took a trip to California. We hired some company in California to do the flying footage for us. But because they didn't really understand what it was we needed, and we needed something very specific, we kind of went out there to show them what we needed. And that's what a lot of these photos are. Oh wait, sorry, before I go further, sorry. I'm going to show you the video.
In the skies of every nation on the planet, a fierce battle is about to begin. A ruthless alien fleet plans to conquer the Earth. Their purpose, to make it their home. Their only obstacle, us. The pilots of these experimental fighter planes and the ground personnel at Air Command Headquarters are unaware of the approaching menace.
Captain Tracy, the fighters are in the air, ready for their final test phase.
Good. Okay, pilots, this is Big Daddy. Let's ring those babies out. Big Red?
This is Big Red.
Mellow Yellow checking in.
Quicksilver here.
Sky Blue, check.
White Knight, Big Daddy.
Mean Green? Mean Green, come in.
So that was the attract mode. That's what we call the attract mode. And that would play, along with instructions on how to play the game and how many quarters it cost and things like that. That would play on a loop when nobody was playing it. There were a few things of note in there. The guy who played the commander in the control center was actually a friend of mine from my acting class. I was taking an acting class, and he was somebody I know. And he had just those chiseled 50s star looks, and I thought he'd be perfect for it, and so he got that part. We actually auditioned other people, and those were the strangest auditions. I mean, I've been to auditions as an actor, and I've been to auditions as a director, but this was very early on in my career. And basically, we were asking people to do things like scream at an alien ship. So we had these actors from Chicago come in and scream, and it was, I mean, I felt for them. It was just it was the most ridiculous scenario to have these people go, okay, so there's this alien ship, and just scream. Oh, ah, you know. Hard for some people to do, but not for others, and we did find some actors. So I will also say that the timing on this was such, there was a trade show coming up in February of 1984. So we had this deadline. They wanted to show this game at the trade show in 1984. So they gave us a deadline. I don't remember exactly when we went to California, but it was sometime in 1983. And it was an enormous task ahead of us because we had to shoot the video, edit the video, program the game. It was a lot. But we were committed to doing that. We were excited about it. Let me come back here to the photos. So Dennis and I, this is Dennis Norman. Dennis and I head out to Los Angeles, California, someplace where I think I had been maybe once before in my life. We stayed at the Sheraton Universal. I live in Los Angeles now, so a lot of this is hysterical to me. This is me wearing my Milestar t-shirt. Milestar was the company that Gottlieb turned into. There's the two of us. And this is where we flew out of. This is a place called Clay Lacy Jets in Burbank. They do a lot, and I don't even know if they're still around, but they did a lot of shooting for the film industry. And we took off in this Learjet. There's a bunch of the crew. In the front of the plane was a camera. This is actually the camera that was in the front of the plane with some controls to show, to maneuver the lens and point in different directions. This is a belly camera. So actually under the bottom of the plane was another camera that they could steer and control and turn around. Here, this is the operation, the belly cam. Dennis over here, and I'm not sure, one of the crew guys, the local crew guys. There's the front of the plane. It was very exciting for me to be in a Learjet. I will say it didn't take me too long to get sick. We left LA and we were flying into Arizona. We were stopping at all these tiny little airports, and I bought some Dramamine as quickly as I could. The Dramamine made me extraordinarily tired, and so my memory of this trip was that I was very tired most of the time. We were flying over an area called Lake Powell. It was a beautiful area. This is just some of the scenery that we were flying over. And we were instructing them how to shoot. They were shooting out of the front, they were shooting out of the bottom, different angles. This area is where they shot the original Planet of the Apes. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie Planet of the Apes, but the spaceship crashes in Lake Powell. And again, just some beautiful, beautiful scenery. Stopping at these tiny little airports in the middle of nowhere in our little Learjet. So it was a pretty amazing flight. On the way back from Arizona, we were going over some farmland. So this sort of terrain made it into the game as well. And here is a mock-up of the plane. Now if you look, this is Jeff Lee's hands. He made this little model out of cardboard tubing and some pinball parts. But it's a little fighter jet, and this is actually the thing that he used as a model. At the time, we had no digitization hardware. All we could do, he could just use these photographs as reference and then literally plot pixels in a grid to try to match it. So this was one angle, this was a side angle. I mentioned before we had multiple angles on the plane, and this is a sort of banked side angle. Let me go back to the video. So you may have noticed in the track mode, the little clip I showed a minute ago, there was a shot of just clouds. That was a shot where the computer was actually generating the plane, so you would see some fighter planes on top of the clouds. But the other thing we put into this game was the ability that every time you played it, it would be different. You'd see different sights. So even though the gameplay would have been the same, you're flying over a different area. So, and it was random. So every time you played, you might see, some levels might have been just one, but you know, sometimes we had a choice of 3, sometimes we had a choice of 2. It was very random, but let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So this is the actual start of the game.
What's happening? I'm being attacked. Looks like some kind of UFOs.
So, and this is the first level. So you might have started out and you're flying and your background